There's a rule that has defined our understanding of human history for over a century. Civilization begins with agriculture. First you plant wheat, then you build cities, then you construct temples, in that order, always. In 1994, a German archaeologist standing on a barren hill in southeastern Turkey realized that rule was wrong. Beneath his feet lay a temple complex built 11,600 years ago, nearly 2,000 years before humans invented farming. The people who constructed it were hunter-gatherers using stone tools. They had no metal, no wheel, no written language. Yet they were quarrying limestone pillars that weighed 20 tons, carving three-dimensional art into solid rock, and engineering floors using a chemical process that wouldn't be seen again until the Roman Empire. This is Göbekli Tepe, and it changes everything we thought we knew about the beginning of civilization. The site sits on a ridge in southern Turkey, deliberately buried under hundreds of tons of earth sometime around 8000 BC. For over 10,000 years it waited in total darkness. When archaeologists finally uncovered the first chamber, they found something that according to every textbook shouldn't exist. A monumental stone temple built by people who were supposed to be living in skin tents, struggling to survive. Tonight, we're crossing the gateway into a world that existed before history began. A world that built monuments before it built farms. A world whose achievements were so advanced they spent 2,000 years forgetting how. As always, the visuals are here to illustrate, but they're not necessary to follow along. Whether you're settling in to sleep, working in the background, or simply exploring the past, get comfortable. And before we begin, subscribe to Mystic Gateways. We explore documented archaeological mysteries every week, examining the evidence that challenges what we think we know. Now let's return to a hilltop in Turkey, where one discovery is rewriting the story of human civilization. In 1963, a team from the University of Istanbul conducted an archaeological survey across southeastern Turkey. When they reached a limestone ridge overlooking the Harran Plain, they noted broken flint scattered across the surface and dismissed the hill as a medieval cemetery. The site was catalogued and forgotten. 30 years later, Klaus Schmidt read that survey report and saw something everyone else had missed. Schmidt was an archaeologist who had spent years excavating Neolithic sites across the Near East. He understood the subtle signs that separate natural formations from human construction. The density of worked flint on that ridge, the shape of the hill itself, the way limestone fragments lay scattered in deliberate patterns, none of it matched a natural landscape. In October 1994, Schmidt returned to the site with a small team. Within hours of opening the first trench, they uncovered the top of a massive T-shaped limestone pillar, standing upright in the ground. As they cleared more soil, the scale became apparent. The pillar stood nearly 6 meters tall. Its surface was smooth, precisely squared, covered with carvings of animals rendered in high relief. This wasn't crude stonework. This was master-level masonry. Schmidt realized he was standing on top of a buried temple. And when the first carbon dating results came back, they showed something that contradicted everything archaeologists thought they knew about this period. The deepest layers of the site dated to 9,600 BC. To understand why that date is so significant, we need context. In 9,600 BC, the last ice age had just ended. Britain was still connected to continental Europe by a massive land bridge. Woolly mammoths were still alive. According to every standard model of human development, people at this time were living in small nomadic groups, using flint tools, hunting wild animals, and gathering plants. They were not building stone temples. The established narrative was clear. Agriculture came first, around 8000 BC in the Fertile Crescent, when humans domesticated wheat and barley. Permanent settlements followed. Only after communities had stable food supplies and sedentary populations did they begin constructing religious monuments. This progression made logical sense. Building a temple requires feeding workers who aren't hunting or gathering. It requires coordination across hundreds of people over many years. It requires specialists, stone carvers, engineers, organizers, who can't be supported without agricultural surplus. Göbekli Tepe inverts that entire sequence. The site contains no evidence of agriculture, no domesticated plant remains, no grain storage, no farming tools. The tens of thousands of animal bones found across the site are all from wild species, primarily gazelle and aurochs. These were hunters. Yet the physical evidence shows they were moving stones that weighed up to 20 tons. They were carving sophisticated three-dimensional sculptures. They were using advanced construction techniques. And they were doing it before the invention of pottery, before the development of metalworking, before anyone had planted a seed. The implications are staggering. It suggests that monumental architecture, the kind of large-scale communal construction we associate with advanced civilizations, didn't require agriculture to develop. It suggests that complex social organization, specialized labor, and shared ideology could exist among mobile hunter-gatherer populations. It suggests we've been reading the story of civilization backwards. As excavations continued through the 1990s and 2000s, the site revealed itself in layers. Göbekli Tepe isn't a single structure, but a complex of at least 20 circular enclosures, each featuring massive T-shaped pillars arranged in precise geometric patterns. The enclosures are semi-subterranean, carved into the limestone bedrock of the ridge. Schmidt identified 4 distinct architectural layers. The deepest, oldest layer contains the largest pillars and the most sophisticated artwork. As you move upward through time, the structures become smaller, simpler, less refined. This presented another problem. There was no learning curve. Usually, when archaeologists excavate a site, they see technological progression. Early layers show crude work that gradually improves as the culture develops skills over generations. At Göbekli Tepe, the pattern is reversed. The oldest work is the best work. The culture appears to have arrived at the site with their skills fully developed, then slowly lost those abilities over the next 2,000 years. This regression suggests Göbekli Tepe wasn't the beginning of this architectural tradition. It was already a mature expression of knowledge that must have developed somewhere else, at some earlier time. Schmidt spent the rest of his life excavating the site. When he died in 2014, less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe had been uncovered. The German Archaeological Institute continues the work today, and every season reveals new details that deepen the mystery. The site sits on a high ridge with no natural water source and no protection from the elements. It was deliberately chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with survival. The people who built here were making a statement. They were creating something meant to last. And last it did. Buried intentionally. Preserved perfectly. Waiting 11,000 years to tell us we were wrong about when our story began. When you stand inside one of the main enclosures at Göbekli Tepe, the first thing that strikes you isn't the age, it's the precision. The central pillars aren't simply placed on the ground. They're set into pedestals carved directly from the living bedrock. The builders weren't working on top of the hill. They were working into it, integrating their structures with the geology of the mountain itself. This requires planning that extends far beyond a seasonal gathering. It implies a master blueprint followed with clinical precision across decades, possibly generations. The pillars themselves present an engineering problem that archaeologists are still trying to solve. The largest stand nearly 18 feet tall and weigh approximately 20 tons. They were quarried from limestone bedrock several hundred meters away, transported across rough terrain, and erected vertically with millimeter-level precision. In a world without metal tools, without wheels, without domesticated animals to pull heavy loads, the logistics are staggering. Modern engineers estimate that moving a 20-ton block would require coordinated effort from at least 500 people using rope and wooden levers. But the terrain makes this even more difficult. Göbekli Tepe sits on a steep rocky ridge. Moving massive stone slabs uphill across limestone requires not just manpower, but sophisticated understanding of leverage, weight distribution, and physics. The quarries themselves tell part of the story. You can still see the negative impressions where pillars were cut from the bedrock. The process involved creating a trench around the pillar's outline, then using stone wedges to break it free from the base. Some unfinished pillars remain in the quarry, including one that measures nearly 8 meters long, larger than anything successfully moved to the site. The decision to abandon these giants suggests the builders had reached the physical limits of their capabilities. Or perhaps priorities shifted suddenly, forcing them to leave their work incomplete. Once the pillars reached the enclosures, they had to be lifted upright and secured. The pedestals carved into the bedrock show remarkable precision. The pillars fit into these sockets with minimal gap, creating stable foundations that have held for over 11,000 years. This isn't trial and error construction. This is engineering based on accumulated knowledge. The artwork presents its own technical mystery. Many pillars are covered with high-relief carvings showing animals in motion: leopards, foxes, wild boars, snakes, scorpions, and birds. These aren't simple scratches. The artist removed centimeters of surrounding limestone to leave the animals protruding from the stone surface. Pillar 43 in Enclosure D, sometimes called the vulture stone, features a complex arrangement of carved animals and abstract symbols arranged in a deliberate pattern. The composition shows sophisticated understanding of visual storytelling and symbolic communication. Creating these carvings with stone tools requires extraordinary patience and skill. A single mistake, one poorly placed strike, can ruin weeks of work. The fact that we see this quality repeated across dozens of pillars suggests these weren't experiments. This was a mature artistic tradition with established techniques and experienced craftspeople. Perhaps the most surprising technical achievement is hidden underfoot. Several enclosures feature floors made from terrazzo, a composite material created from crushed limestone mixed with burnt lime. Producing burnt lime requires heating limestone to temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius and maintaining that heat for several days. This doesn't happen accidentally. It requires a dedicated kiln and substantial fuel supply. The resulting material is waterproof, durable, and remarkably similar to modern concrete. Chemical analysis of the terrazzo floors shows consistent composition across different enclosures, suggesting standardized production methods. This is industrial-scale chemical engineering appearing 6,000 years before we thought humans had developed such techniques. The decision to use terrazzo also reveals priorities. The builders weren't just concerned with appearance. They were focused on longevity, creating floors that could withstand weather and time. The enclosures themselves show careful astronomical consideration. Several researchers have documented that certain pillars align with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, and the rising positions of specific stars. While debate continues about intentionality, the mathematical probability of these alignments occurring by chance is remarkably low. If Göbekli Tepe functioned partly as an observatory, it adds another layer to the builders' knowledge. They weren't just master masons and chemists. They were astronomers tracking celestial movements with scientific rigor. The architecture also demonstrates understanding of acoustics. The semi-subterranean design of the enclosures, carved into the hillside with stone walls rising above, would have created unique sound properties. Experiments show that certain frequencies resonate within these spaces in ways that might have been intentional. Every technical detail points to the same conclusion. This wasn't primitive construction. This was sophisticated engineering based on accumulated knowledge of materials, mathematics, physics, and chemistry. The question becomes unavoidable. Where did this knowledge come from? There's no evidence of gradual development at Göbekli Tepe itself. The oldest layers show the highest skill level. This suggests the builders arrived with their techniques already perfected, implying a much longer history of architectural experimentation that must have occurred elsewhere. We're looking at a finished product, but the workshop is missing. The scale of the construction also reveals social complexity. Conservative estimates suggest thousands of people were involved in building and maintaining the site over centuries. Coordinating that many workers requires hierarchical organization, specialized roles, and systems for resource distribution. These are characteristics we associate with agricultural civilizations, yet they're appearing here among hunters who supposedly lacked the social structures to support such projects. Göbekli Tepe proves that monumental architecture and complex society don't require farming. They require shared purpose, and that shared purpose was powerful enough to motivate people to move mountains. For years, Göbekli Tepe was treated as a singular anomaly, an isolated miracle of prehistoric engineering with no context or comparison. That changed in 2021. The Taş Tepeler project, a comprehensive archaeological survey of southeastern Turkey, revealed something extraordinary. Göbekli Tepe wasn't alone. At least 12 similar sites have been identified across the region, all featuring T-shaped pillars, circular enclosures, and sophisticated stone carving. We're not looking at one temple. We're looking at a regional network spanning hundreds of square kilometers. Sites like Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvan Tepesi, and Sayburç show architectural styles and symbolic motifs consistent with Göbekli Tepe. The distribution suggests this wasn't the work of isolated groups, but a coordinated civilization operating with shared knowledge and purpose. The implications are staggering. A network this size requires sustained population, logistical coordination, and territorial control. These people weren't wandering nomads making seasonal pilgrimages. They were managing a sacred landscape that functioned as a unified cultural system. Karahan Tepe, located about 35 kilometers from Göbekli Tepe, provides the clearest evidence of this coordination. Excavations uncovered structures remarkably similar to Göbekli Tepe's enclosures, but with distinctive features that suggest specialized functions. One chamber, carved directly into bedrock, contains 11 pillars shaped to resemble phalluses, surrounding a larger central stone. The walls feature carved human heads with serpentine necks. The layout creates a processional pathway, deliberately channeling movement through narrow passages before opening into the ritual space. This isn't accidental design. This is theatrical architecture engineered to create specific psychological experiences. The builders understood how to use physical space to manipulate human emotion and behavior. The chamber also features channels carved into the floor, suggesting rituals involving liquids, water, blood, or other substances central to ceremonies performed here. The level of planning required to create these spaces shows sophisticated understanding of human psychology, 6,000 years before the first cathedral architecture appeared in Europe. At Sayburç, discovered in 2021, excavators found something even more remarkable. A narrative relief carved into stone showing sequential scenes. A central male figure flanked by two leopards stands beside another scene depicting a man facing a bull with lowered horns. This is storytelling frozen in limestone, dated to approximately 9000 BC. Unlike isolated symbols found at other sites, these figures interact in clear, sequential narrative. The central figure grasps his own phallus, a recurring motif throughout the Taş Tepeler sites, possibly symbolizing vitality, creation, or lineage. The leopards are shown in profile with mouths open, teeth bared, creating tension and threat. The anatomical accuracy and use of depth to create perspective suggests this artistic tradition was already mature. This isn't the beginning of an art form, it's refined execution of established style. The Sayburç discovery proves these sites weren't just functional or ritual spaces. They were repositories for complex shared mythology. This civilization was using bedrock to record specific narratives meant to be permanent. By mapping symbols across all 12 known sites, researchers have identified consistent iconographic language. Snakes, scorpions, foxes, wild boars, and birds appear repeatedly, often in similar arrangements. The T-shaped pillar itself seems to represent a stylized human figure, with the horizontal top section suggesting shoulders and the vertical shaft representing the body. This shared visual vocabulary indicates these sites were connected not just geographically but ideologically. They were parts of a single cultural system operating across the entire region. The question of how this system was maintained raises logistical challenges. Moving between sites required crossing difficult terrain. Coordinating construction across multiple locations simultaneously would have required communication networks and leadership hierarchies we don't typically associate with hunter-gatherer societies. Yet the evidence is undeniable. These people were managing a sacred landscape on a scale that rivals later Bronze Age civilizations. The distribution of the sites also suggests territorial control. The Taş Tepeler network occupies prime hunting grounds in a region rich with wild game. The placement of temples across this landscape might have served to mark boundaries, establish gathering points, or create a ceremonial circuit connecting different locations for specific seasonal rituals. Excavations at several sites have uncovered tens of thousands of animal bones, primarily gazelle and aurochs, showing massive hunting operations. This wasn't subsistence hunting. This was industrial-scale meat procurement designed to feed large populations engaged in construction projects. The logistics required to organize, execute, and process this volume of hunting suggests sophisticated coordination. They would have needed to drive entire herds into traps or ambush points, then transport and distribute thousands of kilograms of meat to workers across multiple sites. This creates what archaeologists call a caloric crisis. The standard model assumes you can't support specialized labor without agriculture providing food surplus. Yet here we see specialized masons, sculptors, engineers, and presumably priests or leaders, all supported entirely by hunting and gathering. It proves that agricultural civilization wasn't the only path to social complexity. Shared ideology could organize populations just as effectively as shared grain stores. The Taş Tepeler network represents something fundamentally different from what we expected to find in this period. This wasn't primitive religion emerging from subsistence communities. This was organized, sophisticated, and operating on a scale that challenges every assumption about pre-agricultural society. And then, around 8000 BC, it all stopped. The strangest aspect of Göbekli Tepe isn't how it was built, it's how it ended. When archaeologists examine the stratigraphic layers, they see something that contradicts our basic assumptions about technological progress. The oldest structures are the largest and most sophisticated. As time moves forward, the quality declines. The deepest layer, 3 enclosures, feature pillars up to 6 meters tall with elaborate three-dimensional carvings. The masonry is precise, the artwork refined, the engineering ambitious. In layer 2, built several hundred years later, the pillars are smaller. The enclosures become more rectangular, less circular. The carvings lose their depth, becoming flatter and more abstract. By layer 1, the latest occupation phase, the T-shaped pillars have been replaced by crude stone walls. The artistic sophistication is gone. This is technological regression, the opposite of what we expect to see in the archaeological record. Normally, we observe cultures improving over time as they accumulate knowledge and refine techniques. At Göbekli Tepe, the builders appear to have arrived with their skills fully developed, then gradually lost the ability to maintain them over 2,000 years. This pattern suggests Göbekli Tepe wasn't the origin point of this architectural tradition. It was already a mature expression, possibly a late peak, of knowledge developed much earlier, somewhere else. If these people were forgetting how to build as time passed, it implies we're looking at survivors of a more advanced period attempting to preserve what remained, rather than innovators creating something new. The final mystery is the burial itself. Around 8000 BC, the people of Göbekli Tepe made a decision that has puzzled archaeologists for decades. They buried their greatest achievements under hundreds of tons of earth. This wasn't abandonment. This wasn't natural erosion or collapse. This was deliberate, careful backfilling that required enormous labor. Evidence shows they brought in clean limestone rubble and fill material to cover the enclosures from floor to ceiling. They sealed doorways, filled chambers, and transformed their temples into artificial hills. The process would have taken years and required coordinated effort from hundreds of workers. The care taken in this burial is remarkable. The fill was placed systematically, preserving the structures underneath without damaging them. This suggests they wanted the enclosures protected, hidden, but not destroyed. Why would a society invest massive resources to bury their most important monuments? Several theories exist. Some researchers suggest the sites were retired as part of ritual cycles. Perhaps each enclosure was used for a specific period, then ceremonially closed when its purpose was fulfilled. Others propose the burial was protective, heeding the temples from some perceived threat, environmental, social, or spiritual. A more controversial theory suggests the burial represents the end of an era. As agriculture began spreading across the Fertile Crescent around 8000 BC, the hunter-gatherer lifestyle that supported these sites was disappearing. The burial might symbolize the closing of one world and the opening of another. Whatever the reason, the result was preservation. By burying Göbekli Tepe, its builders ensured their work would survive intact for over 10,000 years. The site sat in total darkness, undisturbed, while agriculture spread across the world. Cities rose and fell, empires conquered and collapsed, and human civilization developed writing, metalworking, mathematics, and science. All that time beneath a Turkish hillside, this monument waited. When Klaus Schmidt finally uncovered the first pillar in 1994, he opened a gateway that had been sealed for 11 millennia. What emerged challenged fundamental assumptions about when civilization began, how it developed, and what our ancestors were capable of achieving. The standard narrative, agriculture creates surplus, surplus creates cities, cities create temples, no longer works. Göbekli Tepe proves that monumental architecture, complex society, and sophisticated engineering existed before farming. It suggests the beginning of our story happened much earlier than we thought, possibly during the Ice Age itself, in a world we're only beginning to understand. Less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. The remaining 95% waits beneath the hill, along with whatever answers it might contain. And Göbekli Tepe is just one of 12 sites in the Taş Tepeler network. The others are barely touched. Entire chambers remain sealed underground. We're standing at the threshold of a lost world, and the gateway is finally opening. Göbekli Tepe changes the map of human history. It proves that before the first farms, before the first cities, before writing, or metal, or the wheel, humans were already building monuments that rival anything constructed by later civilizations. The people who carved these pillars understood engineering, chemistry, astronomy, and art at levels we didn't think possible for hunter-gatherers. They organized themselves into complex societies capable of coordinating massive projects across generations. Then they buried it all and walked away. The questions remain. Where did their knowledge come from? What traditions existed before Göbekli Tepe that taught them to move 20-ton stones and carve three-dimensional art? Why did their skills decline instead of improve? And why did they choose to hide their greatest achievements beneath the earth? The answers are still buried. But every season, archaeologists dig deeper, uncovering new chambers, new pillars, new evidence of a world that existed at the very edge of memory. If discoveries like this fascinate you, subscribe to Mystic Gateways. We explore documented archaeological mysteries every week, examining the evidence that challenges what we think we know about our past. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay curious. The gateways are opening.